wrath of God. Good times. We're going to read from Revelation 8 and 9, where God's wrath is poured out. And so let me just riff for a minute on today. I've been excited for today's stuff. Today's stuff is kind of why I headed down the Revelation pipeline. I'm going to lay out why I interpret the book of Revelation the way I do today. And but it's a little bit graphic, because we're going to look at some historical accounts that match up with some things in the first century. So I want you to think about, I started the series off my first week by reading to you a fake journal entry, pretending that I had had a dream, a prophetic dream, where a king left the northern city to go out west to a city whose colors were yellow and purple, and the king was given a crown. And everybody's like, oh yeah, that's obviously LeBron James. And the baker baked brownies on a Sunday, and people cheered for the brownies the baker baked, and then he slayed a goat in the second month of the 22nd year, and everybody recognized, oh, that's Baker Mayfield beating Tom Brady, and we're all like, that's never going to happen. But like you followed along that symbolic imagery, we could pretty quickly connect it with events that are unfolding around us. And what I think you're going to see, or what I see, and don't, nothing says you have to make the connections that I make. That's not, we're not that kind of church. But what I see are strong connections that I think first century hearers and readers of Revelation would have made between the symbolism in Revelation and real-time things that they had endured. And so as we look to those historic accounts, some of those accounts are a little bit graphic, nothing crazy. Like, I'm not talking slasher movie or anything like that. But having said that, I'll lay all that out, and then my plan is to take the rest of October, hit some of the major themes like Antichrist and stuff like that, and 666. You can't talk about Revelation without talking about 666. Heaven coming to earth, evil empire, theme all through the Bible. We'll talk about those themes through the rest of October, and then I'll end on Halloween, and then we'll do some other things in November. So series will end October 31st, and then we'll move on to the next series. Next week, I'm going to talk a little bit about Revelation, but we're also going to hear from our own Chuck and Christy Badley, who have gone and started a ministry on behalf of Polaris, or as they would say it, Polaris planted a youth center through them in Costa Rica in one of the forest areas. And they're ready to leave it all and go there. And that youth center is already serving kids, meeting their physical needs, and teaching them about Jesus. And some of you are going to go, some of us are going to go, and this is a long-time partnership, and I'm really excited about it. And we're going to talk about that next week. I can't wait for you guys to hear what God is doing through the Badleys and Polaris, Costa Rica, but that's next week. So, let's get to rolling with Revelation. I'm going to start by repeating one of the verses. There's a few different places in the Gospels where Jesus says this, and he's talking to a real-time crowd in, let's say, 30 AD in Jerusalem. And, I'm going to read this, and then we'll talk about the implications. I know this is, I think 2 or 3 times in the series we've gone back to this. Okay. This is Matthew 24. For then, this is Jesus talking to a crowd back then, obviously. For then, there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. In other words, never will be again. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. It would get really, really bad. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. And then he gives a bunch of like apocalyptic imagery and stuff like that. And down in 34, he says, very important. He says this a few different ways in a couple different Gospels. Truly I say to you, like, guys, I mean this. This generation, the people he's talking to in 30 AD, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So Jesus speaks of a great tribulation, unlike anything that had ever been seen, unlike anything that would happen ever in the future. And he says, this will take place in your lifetime, people, not you guys, people back in 30 AD. In some places he says, some of you will not taste death until. In other places he says, this generation will not. In other words, Jesus literally says to a real crowd 2,000 years ago, things are going to get really bad for you. And in the future, they will not get any worse than how bad it's about to get. And in the past, it's never been that bad. So it's important to approach Revelation with the understanding, this is my opinion, because Jesus uses the apocalyptic language of Revelation, and he says this is going to happen back in those people's lifetimes. And it's not going to get any worse ever. So I think that's an important approach for us to have. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through Revelations 8 and 9, and I want to connect you with a guy named Josephus, who wrote about the war that took place between Rome and the Jews. And he wrote in connection with the Romans to detail their conquest over the Jews. And so for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk through this Bible stuff. And then we're going to do 10 minutes of like real life application. Some of you are going to connect with this stuff and find it fascinating. Some of you are going to be bored and you're going to, re-engage for life application, okay? Between 68 and 70 AD, the Romans were fed up with continual Jewish revolts. And they plowed from the north by the Sea of Galilee down south to Jerusalem. They plowed the Holy Land. Incidentally, anytime in Revelation when you see the earth, you can translate it the land. So one potential meaning for any time it says over the whole earth, it could be all of Palestine, okay? They plowed it. And they surrounded Jerusalem for 5 months of siege. They breached the walls, and they crushed the city. Smoking hole in the ground, crushed the city. Okay? So, I'm going to read you from Revelation 8, and then we're going to look at what Josephus says. And like for me, let's say 15 years ago, when I first read about these connections, like the hair on my arm stood up, and I thought, I think that's legit. You'll see what I mean. Okay, Revelation 8. When the Lamb, Jesus, opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about a half an hour. In other words, it got serious. Then I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and the seven trumpets were given to them. And another angel came and stood at the altar with the golden censer. That's one of those, like, you grew up in the Catholic Church, like they walk down, Lunes, Martes, Miracles, and they got the thing on the chain. They don't really chant the days of the week in Spanish. That's just sounds Latin. Thank you. I thought that was very fun. It's just Sherry Tolson. He's the only one that you get your $5 after that. Another angel came and stood at the altar with the golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. We'll get back to that later. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. And then the censer. Here's the first symbolism I want you to connect with. The angel took the censer filled with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Okay? Catastrophic storm language with an earthquake. That's what John saw. Now let's look at the parallel from something Josephus, who wrote about the war, said happened as the war was raging. For there broke out a prodigious storm. Isn't that a great word, prodigious? Just fun to say. In the night, with the utmost violence and very strong winds, with the largest showers. This is one of those old school translations, like some of the E's are missing. You'll notice it's not my fault. It's the way the book is, the English translation. Just want to make that. With continual lightnings, terrible thunderings, and amazing concussions, and bellowings of the earth that was in an earthquake. These things were a manifest indication that some destruction was coming upon men when the system of the world was put into this disorder. And anyone would guess that these wonders foreshewed some grand calamities that were coming. Now, Josephus, not a Christian, no connection with Revelation. He's writing about things that he actually witnessed, that actually happened, and he says there was a massive storm that he connects with the judgment of God, and an earthquake that happened all at once, and he connects it with the judgment of God. So here's my question. Wouldn't you think if you lived back then and were a part of whatever that storm was, that was unlike anything like the judgment of God on earth storm, that when you read symbolism of an angel who threw to the ground, to the earth, to the land, thunder, rumblings, lightning, and earthquake, all in one event, that you would probably make the connection between that symbolism and that storm. Exhibit A. Let's move on. Revelation is going to now give us three distinct images of worldly calamity. This is Revelation 8. I'm going to start in verse 6. Now the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared to blow them. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth, or the land, or Palestinian territory, depending how you, the Holy Land, depending on how you translate that. And a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the grass, all the green grass, was burned up. Second angel blew his trumpet. Something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of the water. And the name of the star was wormwood. That means like bitter. Like the idea there is like ruining water. So what would they call it? Putrefaction? That shouldn't be written here, but like the destruction of water, the ruining of water. Okay. A third of the waters became wormwood, or bitter, ruined, undrinkable. And many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. Okay. So there's imagery of vegetation and tree life being destroyed in the land. Then there is death on the water. And then there is a ruining of the water supply. Three distinct images. Let's look back to Josephus and see what life looked like. And if people who lived through those times would have made any connections with the imagery in Revelation 8 with those three images. Okay? So, here's Josephus. He also, at the same time, gave his soldiers leave to set the suburbs on fire, in order that they should bring timber together and raise bands against the city. Elsewhere, he says, the Romans destroyed the trees in Israel, the land, for fuel and for building their weapons. All the trees that were about the city had been already cut down for the making of the former banks. They cut down all the trees that were in the country that adjoined the city. He also set fire not only to the city itself, but to all the villas and small cities that were round about it. And elsewhere, Josephus goes out of his way to say, listen, vegetation was gone. Plant life, trees, gone. It all got burned or torn down by Rome. So do you think that there would have been some connection there from that first imagery of the trees and the land going up in smoke, being destroyed by ash and fire? And I mean, picture that imagery. There's a place where it talks about like Jerusalem was like molten, like it was like smoldering. Very much that imagery that John uses. Okay. Let's talk about now what Josephus says about the water. He writes that the warring Jews have built themselves a great number of pirate ships and a navy, a lot, as they fought on the seas and protected and controlled the seas and water in the region. So here's what Josephus says about the water, which Revelation specifically points to. A violent wind blew upon them, and it's called by those that sail there the Black Mark wind, and there dashed their ships one against another. There was so much human death that the sea was bloody a long way, and the maritime parts were full of the dead. Is that not very similar to that? What they saw and the sea was turned to blood. And okay, one might see the lake. That's the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus spent most of his ministry, all bloody and full of bodies. This is Josephus, not trying to make any connection with Revelation. He's not a Christian. The Sea of Galilee is 5 miles wide and 12 miles long, and he's saying it was all red. The whole of the country through which they had fled was filled with slaughter, and the Jordan River could not be passed over by reasons of the dead that were in it, also the Dead Sea where they were carried. Now, you couldn't get across the river because of the bodies. Now listen, Sea of Galilee starts north in the Golan Heights, flows down, the Jordan River starts north, flows down to the Sea of Galilee, then flows down to the Dead Sea. That's the whole water supply for Israel. It's the whole water supply for Israel. And Josephus is saying it's piled up with the dead. What's that going to do to the water supply? It's going to ruin it. So you get 3 distinct images in Revelation, 4 with the storm. So you get the storm, you get the trees all gone and burned up, you get death on the water, and you get a ruining of the water supply. And when we look at Josephus, as he describes what Jesus says, this is the worst it's ever going to get, and he's talking about you can't cross the river because it's piled up with the dead. He's saying there's no trees left. He's saying he goes elsewhere to talk about a ruining of the water supply. The water is rancid. It's undrinkable. Because, so do you see those connections? Let me do one more here, and then we'll move on to application. Revelation 9. This is verse 5. They were allowed to okay, so John sees something that can very much be described as like a demonic kind of thing that's going on within the people. They were allowed to torment them for 5 months. How long? 5 months. But not to kill them. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings someone. And in those days, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. So this vision from Revelation speaks about chaos and misery for a very specific time period. How long? 5 months. Look at Josephus. Titus began the siege of Jerusalem in April of 70 AD. The defenders held out desperately for 5 months. But by the end of August, the temple area was occupied and the holy house was burned down. They leveled Jerusalem. And I didn't throw up there because it wouldn't be appropriate for a Sunday morning, okay, with potentially like kids in the crowd and stuff like that. Josephus talks about life during those 5 months in Jerusalem. The things that they did to each other because they were running out of food to get food. When they were surrounded. And specifically, Josephus talks about everybody basically wanted the Romans to just bust through so they could all be slaughtered rather than live like they were while the siege was going on. The inner turmoil, it's unbelievable what had happened there. So let me just close out the Bible study portion by saying, whether you're on board like I'm on board or not, I think you can agree that it's not unreasonable to say that there's a strong possibility that as the first century readers, when this was all fresh in their experience, had read about those specific signs, let's call it, the symbolism from Revelation, they probably would have made some very real connections with things that they had just lived through. It's like, let's say last month in September, I said, I saw 2 mountains by a great city smoldering and then collapse into the sea. You probably have images of the Twin Towers and because you just, like we just went through. So my take on Revelation is that it's describing events in the first century where Jesus had already told people it's not going to ever get any worse than this. And it's meant to connect them with what happened in Israel to a judgment from God against God's people for rejecting Jesus. Because that's what God did. Throughout Scripture, he would judge Israel by using countries around them to do the punishing. But not anti-Semitic. I believe that they're still God's people. I believe that that all Israel will be saved, because that's in the Bible. Paul says that. I don't know how God's going to work all that out. He's never done with Israel. His punishment is redemptive in nature. But my take on Revelation is that it would have given early readers a very specific prophetic connection with what had happened, ultimately linking to God's plan in the redemption and restoration of all things. Let's move on to some specific life application. Number 1. Over this past run of life especially, I have watched people, even people with great wisdom, lose their peace. Just lose their inner peace. And in a lose their minds. They can't sleep at night. They can't, they're just overwhelmed with frustration and up in arms over what's going on in the world around us. I remember when I was growing up in the 80s, and there were great concerns about nuclear bombs with Russia. Some of you guys remember that. Most of you guys remember that. And communism. Some of my earliest memories were concerns about communism taking over. People were really stressed about it. It didn't happen. And I remember after 9/11, people talked about a Muslim takeover in this country. And I remember they talked about martial law and government oversight because people were so scared that they're going to have to rely on the government, and 9/11 was an inside job to create an environment where Americans were scared and so that the government could take over. We'd now need to depend on the government. It's just what they wanted. Then when Trump was president, we were going to get into World War III. When COVID rolled out, there was going to be martial law, an endless lockdown, the end of freedom as we know it. They're going to take our guns, close our churches, outlaw the Bible. We're going to be communist and on and on. Republicans are going to undermine democracy. Trump's going to be a dictator. I saw just today, the most recent, I get The Week magazine, which is editorials from all over the country and all over the world from both sides of the aisle. And the newest clip art, or not clip art, political art on the front, and the title of the newest magazine is essentially the Republicans are undermining democracy. There's a lot out there to be concerned about, right? And I think it's important that we are aware of what's going on. I think we need watchdogs and skeptics. At the same time, though, through all of that I just described, 40 years of all that, I'm still eating Thai food with sweet mango. I'm still watching baseball. I'm still getting crab legs from Costco. Still going to Hilton Head most every summer. Still eat Chinese food with the vets most winter nights, on most winter Sunday nights. All that stress. For what? My life hasn't changed all that much. It's still pretty good. So, here's what I want you to apply to this. If your inner peace is gone, your relationships are a mess, and you've otherwise obsessed over politics and the direction of our world, humanity will be okay if you check out of Facebook, if you unplug from Facebook, and if you stop watching CNN or Fox News, whichever your drug of choice. Leave that to the other watchdogs. There needs to be watchdogs and skeptics, but if you've lost all peace, leave that. Let other people ruin their family. Their Thanksgiving gatherings and their friendships. Let other people do that. Let other people lose sleep over it. We're probably going to be fine. Now, here's a real specific thing. If you're in doubt, does that mean that's not right? Ask your friends and family. Don't listen to your own assessment of your situation, because they're called blind spots for a reason. A lot of people that I talk with about this is are you okay? Because you seem to have just lost your inner peace. No, I'm good. No, I don't watch Newsmax or CNN that much. Just ask other people, how am I doing with this? And if they're you need to back, then enjoy your life. Go feed the poor. Go serve at the city mission. Go sit with an elderly widow or widower and play Scrabble. Do meaningful things to share God's love with people. We need that in this world. What the world will probably be okay with is you taking a break from hardcore worry. Now, I'm not telling everyone to be done with politics. I'm not telling you all to never cock an eyebrow at something you see that you don't trust or that doesn't look right. What I'm saying is, if your joy and your peace are shot, lay it down. You don't have to worry about it. God can show up and reset things whenever He wants. See, I've come to wholeheartedly believe that the world is heading toward the return of Jesus, the resurrection of the dead, and the renewal of all things. Even though I think most of Revelation happened in the past, God punishing the Jews, His own people, and then God punishing Rome for punishing His own people. Like, I think that stuff happened in the past. But I believe that God has it even if it doesn't. Like, even if I'm wrong, God is still we're going to be fine. And we can enjoy our life. And I guess, while I believe it happened in the past, if I'm wrong, and really Revelation 8 and 9 are about, like, Trump 2024, or the Biden-Harris and the squad ticket, and that's really Revelation 8 and 9 going to roll into our country right now, we're not going to thwart Revelation 8 and 9 from happening. So enjoy your life while we have it. Like, if it's all going down in our lifetime and I'm totally wrong, we're not going to stop it. So enjoy the life that God has given you right now. Don't sacrifice your peace from what could happen. So, now, let's talk about what you can do with what you see when you see things that concern you in the world. Let's look at where the power of the saints really lies. Okay? It wasn't in any information that they shared or any conspiracies they called out. That's not where the saints get their power. They didn't accomplish anything through stockpiling ammo or through fighting. Let's look at what made the difference in moving the hand of God. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. So this angel has this censer, and it's filled with the prayers of God's people, and that moves God to bring about judgment. Now, we've already seen in Revelation 5 that elders and the four living creatures have these golden bowls filled with the prayers of God's people, and they pour them out, and it moves the hand of God. Now, Revelation is written. You know that John knows he's going to stir up some fear and some deep feelings from people who read it. And there's only two things in all of Revelation that John says you should do. Two. One, if you're concerned that it's going down in the world around you, that things are getting really bad, number one, you repent of stuff that's going on in your life. Number two, you fill the golden bowls and the censer with prayers. That's it. He doesn't talk about stockpiling. He doesn't talk about get the word out on what's up. He says the prayers of God's people are what bring about response from God. Romans 12:19. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Whatever you're concerned about, which side of the aisle, whatever issue, whatever, would you commit with me to believing Romans 12:19? And you leave that for the wrath of God. And you just pray about it. If this is overwhelming for you, pray about it and let it go. Again, I'm not saying everybody should be done with politics or we should not be aware of what's going on or whatever. What I'm saying is, if you're losing sleep over it and losing peace over it, it's all you can talk about, and it's all you can think about, and it's driving you nuts, would you commit to trusting Romans 12 and trusting the imagery of the angel with the prayers of God's people and just pray about it and let it go? And let God be the judge and the avenger and enjoy your life. Like, just, you know what? I think this is all crumbling, but I'm going to enjoy my life anyway and just pray. And some of you need to step in to that approach. All right, I'm done. Let's stand.